stand where London stands today, 42,000 years ago. No city, no river as you know it, no sign that anything human has ever been here. What surrounds you is open, cold grassland stretching in every direction, cut through by river channels, swept by a wind that carries no smell of smoke or people. No human has ever stood in this place. Then, somewhere around 42,000 BCE, they arrive. Who are they? They are us, fully. Not a transitional species, not a primitive ancestor. These are Homo sapiens with the same brain and the same capacity for language, memory, and complex thought that you carry right now. They have walked here from the east, following the animals that feed them, and they are about to become the first people to ever set foot in what will one day be called Britain. Britain in this moment is not an island. The land beneath what is now the North Sea, a territory geologists call Doggerland, is dry ground, wide and productive, stretching from eastern England to modern Denmark. Britain is the western edge of a much larger European landscape. The people arriving here have not crossed water. They have walked, following herds across an unbroken continent. The landscape they walk into would be unrecognizable today. There are no forests, no green hills, no mild rain. What exists is mammoth steppe, cold, open grassland stretching from Britain east across Europe and Asia into Siberia. In summer, it blooms and feeds enormous herds. In winter, temperatures drop to levels that kill the unprepared within hours. These people are built for exactly this world. The animals here exist on a scale that has no modern equivalent. Woolly mammoths with tusks 15 feet long, woolly rhinoceroses weighing over a ton, cave lions approaching 800 pounds, larger than any cat alive today, giant deer with antler spans of nearly 12 feet, wild horses and bison moving in herds across the open plain, cave hyenas large enough to crack bone with ease. This is a megafauna world, and these people live inside it, not apart from it. The people arriving are already masters of this environment. They have been hunting these animals and surviving these winters across Europe for thousands of years before Britain becomes part of their range. They know how mammoths move, which plants survive the cold, how to read a sky about to turn dangerous. This knowledge was not invented by any one person. It was built across generations, passed down through teaching and story, and it is what makes survival possible. But they are not walking into empty land, at least not entirely. When modern humans first push into northwestern Europe around 42,000 years ago, Neanderthals are still present, not in large numbers. Their populations have been declining, but they are here. They have lived in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years, surviving ice ages that would have ended any less resilient species. Within a few thousand years of modern human arrival, they are gone. What happened between these two kinds of people during that overlap is one of prehistory's most debated questions. No site clearly shows them living side by side. But genetics tells a different story. Every person today with ancestry outside Africa carries roughly 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA, and the result of interbreeding dated to around 45,000 to 50,000 years ago. Whatever the relationship between these groups was, it was not simply a story of separation. The oldest confirmed modern human fossil found in Britain is a fragment of upper jaw, 3 teeth still in the bone, pulled from Kent's Cavern in Devon in 1927. When it was redated in 2011 using surrounding animal bone stratigraphy, the result placed it between 41,500 and 44,200 years old. That fragment, sitting in Torquay Museum today, is the earliest direct physical evidence of our species anywhere in northwestern Europe. These earliest modern humans in Britain belong to what archaeologists call the Aurignacian cultural tradition. Their toolkit shows something new: flint blades struck with precision, worked bone and antler points, personal ornaments, pierced shells, at beads, and eventually art. Where earlier technologies changed slowly across vast stretches of time, Aurignacian technology shows regional variation and rapid innovation. Something different is happening in the human mind. The total number of modern humans across all of Europe at this point is almost impossibly small. A 2019 demographic study estimated the entire Aurignacian population of Western and Central Europe at somewhere between 800 and 3,300 individuals. Britain itself may have held only a few hundred. These are not communities in any recognizable sense. They are small bands, perhaps 20 to 30 strong, moving across enormous territories in the wake of the animals they depend on. Small does not mean simple. 25 people who know how to survive this environment carry more practical knowledge than a library. Every adult is simultaneously a toolmaker, a tracker, a firekeeper, a healer, and a navigator. When someone dies, their portion of the group's shared knowledge dies with them unless it has already been passed on. This is why teaching is more important than hunting. Without the transfer of knowledge, the group does not survive the next generation. Their relationship to the land they move through is not the relationship of strangers passing through. These bands know their ranges intimately. Every flint outcrop, every river crossing, every valley where herds funnel at particular times of year. This knowledge accumulates across generations, refined each season, encoded in stories told by firelight. The landscape is not a backdrop to their lives. It is the text they read every single day. This is where the story of the people of Britain begins. Not with farming, not with monuments, not with medals or writing. It begins here, in the cold grassland of the Mammoth Steppe, with a small group of people walking west into a land no human has seen. They arrive without ceremony, without any sense that what they are doing will matter for tens of thousands of years. They come because the animals are here, and there is room. They move, they adapt, they survive. They are the first Britons. What follows is not a straightforward story of expansion and flourishing. Human presence in Britain across the Upper Paleolithic is never stable and never guaranteed. The climate swings between conditions that make life possible and conditions that make it impossible, and people move accordingly. South when the ice advances, say back north when it retreats. The period between first arrival and the end of the last ice age is not one long chapter. It is a series of arrivals and disappearances, of populations building and collapsing, of people adapting to a world that will not hold still. Once people are in Britain, the question is how they actually live here, not in the abstract, but day to day, season to season, in a landscape that is trying, in many ways, to kill them. The evidence comes from caves, because caves preserve what open ground destroys, and from a handful of sites scattered across southern Britain where the conditions were right to hold something of these people for 40,000 years. What survives is fragmentary, but it is enough to build a picture. Caves are not where these people spend most of their time. They are seasonal shelters, down return points, places that offer a rock ceiling and wind protection when the weather turns. The living areas are always near the entrance where daylight reaches and where smoke from a fire can escape. The dark interior is a different space entirely, used for different purposes. Most of the year, these people are out on the open Mammoth Steppe, moving, and their shelters out there leave almost nothing for archaeology to find. On the open ground, shelter means animal hides stretched over a frame, wood where it is available, bone where it is not. Sites in Russia from this same period show structures built from mammoth bones, enormous interlocking frameworks that required planning and cooperation to raise. Britain's evidence for open-air camps is sparse, but the people here are part of the same cultural world as those builders. They know how to construct fast, functional shelter from whatever the landscape provides, and they know how to take it down and move within hours. Clothing is not an afterthought in this world. it is survival technology as critical as any weapon. By this period, bone needles with eyes appear in the European archaeological record, which means tailored clothing, shaped, fitted garments sewn with sinew thread to trap warm air close to the body while shedding wind and moisture. The difference between tailored cold weather clothing and simply wrapping yourself in a skin is, in the right conditions, the difference between living and freezing to death overnight. Fire is the center of everything. It provides warmth, light through the long, dark months. Cooked food that dramatically expands what is safely edible. And a perimeter that keeps predators at a cautious distance at night. A group that loses its fire in a British winter and cannot restart it is in immediate, life-threatening danger. Starting fire with a bow drill, spinning a wooden shaft against a board until friction generates a coal, demands matched materials, correct technique, and endurance. It takes years to learn to do it reliably in cold conditions with cold hands. The primary prey animals are horse and red deer, with reindeer, bison, mammoth, and woolly rhinoceros taken when opportunity allows. Horse and red deer appear most consistently in the bone assemblages from British cave sites of this period. They are the reliable staple, the animals that can be intercepted and killed with a level of predictability that sustains a group through the seasons. Yet mammoth hunting is real and evidenced, but it is a significant undertaking, not a daily one. The atlatl, a throwing board that extends the arm and multiplies the force and distance of a spear throw, is the primary hunting weapon of this period in Britain. A spear launched with an atlatl travels further and hits harder than one thrown by hand alone. Getting close enough to a horse or a deer to make the throw demands a different set of skills. Reading wind direction, moving through open terrain without triggering flight, knowing when the animal's attention is divided. These are skills built across years of practice and accumulated observation passed down through generations. Mammoth hunting requires a different approach entirely. Adults weigh up to 6 tons. Their senses, particularly smell, are acute. And an alarmed animal at full charge is among the most dangerous things alive in this landscape. The evidence from European sites suggests the most effective strategies exploited terrain. Funneling animals toward river crossings, steep ground, or natural constrictions where their size and momentum became a liability. A well-placed spear in the right location can sever major vessels and bring down even a large animal, but the margin for error is nearly zero. The cave lion, Panthera spelaea, is the apex predator of Ice Age Britain, and it commands genuine respect from everyone sharing the landscape with it. Larger than any African lion alive today, some individuals approaching 800 pounds, cave lions hunt horse and deer, which puts them in direct competition with human hunters for the same prey. The evidence from across Europe shows humans killed cave lions and skinned them. Cut marks on lion bones confirm it. The relationship between people and cave lions across this period is one of long, tense competition, occasionally turning lethal in both directions. Cave hyenas are a constant presence at every site. Their bone accumulations fill British cave systems from this period, gnawed remains, coprolites, the splintered teeth-marked bones of animals they dragged in to consume in safety. Hyena packs in this period could number 30 or more, capable of driving human groups away from kills and from the best-positioned cave shelters by sheer force of numbers. Managing this competition is part of daily life, not an occasional crisis. Cave bears complicate the picture in a different way. They are not predators of humans in the way cave lions are, but adult males weigh over 1,000 pounds and they use the same caves. The scratch marks their claws left on cave walls are still visible in some sites across Europe today. Bone beds in cave interiors accumulate across thousands of years as bears enter to hibernate and do not emerge. Humans and cave bears share these spaces across generations, and the human communities here know exactly how to read the signs of a bear's presence and what to do about it. Diet is broader than the image of the mammoth hunter suggests. Smaller animals, Arctic hare, ptarmigan, Arctic fox, are trapped using snares that leave almost no archaeological trace, but their bones appear at occupation sites with cut marks that confirm human processing. Fish contribute protein where rivers are accessible. The plant foods, roots, tubers, berries, and season, provide vitamins and calories that meat alone cannot. The archaeological evidence from one burial in this period shows that the individual's diet included around 20% fish, with horse, reindeer, roots, and berries making up the rest. A varied diet is not a luxury. It is what keeps a population healthy across decades. In a cave on the Gower Peninsula in South Wales, sometime around 33,000 years ago, something happens that tells us more about these people than any tool assemblage can. A young man, somewhere under 25 years old, is buried in a shallow grave along the cave wall. His bones are covered in red ochre. Beside him are rods of mammoth ivory, intentionally broken before being placed with him. Perforated periwinkle shells, the remains of a necklace or clothing decoration, lie near the body. A mammoth skull sits at the head of the grave. This is Paviland Cave on the Gower, and the young man buried there is the oldest ceremonial burial ever found in Western Europe. The burial was discovered in 1823 by a geology professor named William Buckland, who assumed from the ornaments that the bones were female and from their location that they dated to the Roman era. He called the find the Red Lady of Paviland. He was wrong on both counts by a considerable margin. The bones belonged to a young man, and they were not 2,000 years old, but 33,000. Buckland's mistake reflects the limits of his framework, not a failure of observation. The idea that any human burial could be that ancient was, in 1823, and genuinely unthinkable. What the Paviland burial tells us is that these people have a world beyond survival. The ochre, the grave goods, the deliberate positioning of the body, these are not the actions of people simply disposing of the dead. They are the actions of people who believe something about death, who mark the passing of an individual with ceremony, who invest time and materials in a ritual that serves no purely practical purpose. What exactly they believed, we cannot know. But that they believed something, that they had an inner life, a symbolic world, ideas about what a human being is and what happens when one dies, is written in that red-stained grave as clearly as anything in the archaeological record. Or the social life of these bands, 20 to 30 people moving and living and hunting together, is more structured than the small number implies. Every relationship matters: who leads, who defers, how food is shared, how disputes are resolved, how the young are taught. These are questions every human group must answer. The archaeology offers one quiet answer about the values these communities hold. Skeletal remains from this period across Europe include individuals who survived serious injuries, healed fractures, healed infections that would have been fatal without sustained support. Someone fed them while they could not move. Someone kept them warm. Care for the dependent is not a modern idea. It is 40,000 years old at minimum. The tools these people use reward close examination. Ornation blades struck from prepared flint cores are thin, parallel-sided, and sharp enough to cut through hide, bone, and sinew. A single flint core yields multiple useful tools: scrapers for cleaning hides, burins for engraving bone and antler, backed blades for cutting. Making these tools consistently and well requires understanding how stone fractures, its internal structure, its response to different angles of force, the way heat treatment changes its behavior. This is applied materials science, practiced until intuitive, developed over thousands of years of accumulated experimentation. Through the Gravettian period that follows, Roughly 33,000 to 26,000 years ago, the cultural world deepens. Across Europe, Venus figurines appear, small carved figures, often female, made from ivory, limestone, or fired clay, are found from France to Russia. Britain's evidence for the Gravettian is limited but real, concentrated at sites like Paviland and Kent's Cavern. What the figurines mean is debated. What they confirm is that the people making them are thinking about things beyond the next meal, that they have a symbolic life, a shared set of ideas about the human form and human identity, expressed in objects they carry and keep and bury with their dead. Around 25,000 years ago, something begins to shift in Britain. Not suddenly, nothing in this story happens suddenly, but across generations the land becomes harder. Winters lengthen, the cold bites deeper and holds longer. The ice sheets that have always sat somewhere to the north begin pushing south, and the world that people have built their lives around starts slowly and then decisively to close. This period is called the last glacial maximum, and at its peak around 22,000 years ago, the British-Irish ice sheet covers roughly 2/3 of what is now Britain and Ireland. Scotland disappears entirely under ice thousands of feet thick. Ireland is gone. Most of Wales is gone. The ice reaches as far south as the Bristol Channel and the Thames Valley. What remains of southern England is not habitable in any meaningful sense. It is cold, wind-scoured, treeless, and stripped of the resources that people need to survive. The animals go first. The great herds that have defined this landscape for tens of thousands of years follow the retreating grassland south and east across Doggerland toward the more sheltered latitudes of southern Europe. Without the herds, the human groups that depend on them have no reason and no way to stay. The abandonment of Britain is not a decision made by anyone. It is the accumulated result of thousands of smaller decisions made by dozens of bands over centuries, each one concluding that there is nothing left here worth staying for. Think about what this means across human time. A grandmother tells stories of her own grandmother hunting horse in valleys that are now buried under hundreds of feet of ice. A child grows up in a landscape their grandparents would not recognize. The knowledge these people carry, which plants grow where the herds cross in autumn, where the good flint outcrops are, becomes less and less useful as the land it describes disappears. Knowledge built across generations becomes obsolete within generations. That is the quiet devastation of what the ice does to human culture. The retreat south is not a march. These people do not pack up and leave in a season. Bands contract their ranges slowly, moving their seasonal rounds further south as conditions demand, until the ranges no longer include Britain at all. By around 20,000 years ago, when the ice sheet is at its maximum extent, there is no confirmed evidence of any human presence anywhere in what is now the British Isles. The land sits empty as it had before the first arrival, waiting. Where do they go? The genetic and archaeological evidence points to the refugia of southwestern Europe, primarily the Franco-Cantabrian region spanning what is now northern Spain and southern France. This is where the ice does not reach, where the coast moderates the worst of the cold, where animals persist in numbers that can sustain human populations. Cave art concentrations from this exact period are extraordinary. Lascaux, Altamira, Chauvet, because this is where the people are, compressed into a relatively small area, producing culture at a density that the open mammoth steppe never required. Britain, during the peak of the last glacial maximum, is not a place of marginal survival. It is a place of zero survival. The permafrost extends across the unglaciated south. Average temperatures in what is now southern England drop to around -10 degrees Celsius in winter, possibly colder. There is no tree cover. There is no plant food of any significance. The rivers run with meltwater too cold and too sediment-heavy to sustain fish populations. This is not a landscape testing human resilience. It is a landscape that has simply ceased to be inhabitable. The ice sheet itself is a remarkable thing by any measure. At its peak, it holds enough water locked in frozen form to lower global sea levels by around 120 meters compared to today. Doggerland, already dry ground, expands further as the sea retreats. The English Channel either does not exist or is a shallow river valley. Britain, if you could stand on the southern edge and look east, connects to Europe across a plain wider than France. But there is nothing here. The plain is frozen and empty, and the ice to the north reflects the sunlight back into a sky that never fully warms. Across the roughly 10,000 years of the last glacial maximum, the people who were once the Britons are living in southern Europe, adapting, changing, developing new cultural forms suited to the compressed and crowded conditions of the refugia. The Solutrean culture emerges in Iberia and southern France during this period, a toolkit of extraordinary sophistication, producing flint points of a thinness and symmetry that modern knappers struggle to replicate. These are the descendants of the people who left Britain, and they are not sitting still. They are innovating, surviving, and eventually waiting, without knowing they are waiting, for the ice to release the north. The mammoth, meanwhile, are being pushed to the margins of their own range. The cold that drives people south is not necessarily good for mammoth either. The steppe tundra ecosystem they depend on contracts and fragments under the ice. Woolly rhinoceros populations fall. Cave lions, whose prey base is under pressure, become rarer. The megafauna world is being stressed by the same climatic forces that have emptied Britain, and some species will not recover when the ice retreats. The seeds of extinction are being planted here, in the cold, across species that have no way to know what is coming. Then, around 14,700 years ago, something extraordinary happens. The climate flips. Not over millennia, but within decades, fast enough that a single human lifetime could witness the change. Ice cores from Greenland record a temperature rise of roughly 10 degrees Celsius in the space of around 50 years. 50 years. The kind of change that in geological terms is practically instantaneous. The ice sheets begin to collapse, rivers flood, the land reemerges from under the melt, and the animals, following the grassland that spreads north in the warming's wake, and begin to move back toward Britain. The people follow, as they always have, because the animals lead and the people follow. The first recolonization of Britain after the last glacial maximum is not confirmed in the archaeological record until around 15,500 years ago, within a few centuries of the initial warming, and even then it is tentative, seasonal perhaps, exploratory bands ranging into a landscape that is still transforming. The Britain they return to is not the Britain their ancestors left. That world is gone. What they find instead is something new, something beginning, something that will take thousands more years to settle into the world we now call the Mesolithic. Around 14,700 years ago, the climate shifts with a speed that geology rarely produces. Ice cores from Greenland record a temperature rise of roughly 10 degrees Celsius across just a few decades. By geological standards, this is almost instantaneous. The ice sheets begin to collapse. Rivers run with meltwater. Vegetation spreads north across ground that has been frozen and barren for thousands of years, and the animals, following the grassland as it pushes northward, begin moving back toward Britain. The people follow. They always follow the animals. The groups living in the refugia of southwestern Europe, the descendants of those who left Britain when the ice advanced, begin ranging further north as conditions allow. They belong to what archaeologists call the Magdalenian culture, the same broad tradition found across Western Europe at this moment. They are skilled, mobile, and experienced hunters of horse and red deer. Within centuries of the warming, evidence of their presence appears in southern Britain. The earliest confirmed site of this recolonization is Gough's Cave in Cheddar Gorge, Somerset. Radiocarbon dating places the first human occupation of the cave at around 14,900 to 14,750 years ago, almost exactly coinciding with the onset of the warming. The cave sits at the foot of a limestone gorge, roughly 15 kilometers inland from the Bristol Channel, positioned near river systems that horse and deer would have followed northward. The people who camped here were not pioneers stumbling into unknown territory. They were experienced hunters reading a landscape that the animals had already found. The occupation of Gough's Cave was intense but brief. Dating evidence suggests it lasted perhaps only 2 or 3 human generations, a remarkably short window. During that time, the cave served as a hunting base, likely seasonal, used during summer and winter visits to exploit horse and red deer moving through the gorge and the surrounding Mendip Hills. The artifact collection recovered from the cave is the richest of any British Paleolithic site. Thousands of flint tools, worked antler, and carved bone, all accumulated across what may have been no more than a few decades of repeated use. Then, the human remains. Over 100 fragmentary bones were recovered from Gough's Cave, representing at least 5 to 7 individuals, including a child of around 3 years old and 2 adolescents. Every one of these bones shows the same systematic modification: cut marks from defleshing, marks from disarticulation, evidence of marrow extraction from the long bones, and human tooth marks. The skulls had been carefully shaped into cups, the cranial vaults cleaned, the edges smoothed, converted into containers. This is not the result of violence or desperation. The evidence points clearly to ritual cannibalism. Ritual cannibalism is practiced in documented human cultures across the world and across history, and it carries meanings that vary enormously depending on context. At Gough's Cave, the careful treatment of the remains, the shaping of skull cups, the engraving found on some bones, suggests something ceremonial rather than purely nutritional. These people are not eating their dead out of starvation. They are doing something with their dead that carries meaning within their cultural framework, and something we cannot fully reconstruct, but that was evidently deliberate, considered, and shared across the group. The people at Gough's Cave are not alone in Britain. Around the same time, another group appears at Kendrick's Cave on the northern coast of Wales. An ancient DNA analysis published in 2022 reveals something striking. The two groups, living only around 1,000 years apart and separated by roughly 200 miles, are genetically distinct from each other. They came from different ancestral populations within the broader refugia of southwestern Europe. Britain, in its first centuries of recolonization, is not being settled by a single coherent group spreading outward from one point. Multiple distinct populations are moving into the space that the ice has left. The difference between these two groups goes beyond genetics. Their diets differ. The Gough's Cave people ate primarily terrestrial food, predominantly horse and deer, while the Kendrick's Cave people consumed significant quantities of marine mammals, suggesting they were exploiting the coastal resources of the Irish Sea. Their tools differ. Their treatment of the dead differs. Two groups, living within the same warming landscape and within the same broad cultural tradition, have arrived from different places with different practices and are building different lives in the same newly opened land. What do these returning people look like? Ancient DNA from this period across Europe gives us a picture that tends to surprise modern audiences. The Magdalenian people recolonizing Britain had dark or dark to intermediate skin, dark hair, and, in some individuals, blue or green eyes. The genetic variants associated with lighter skin pigmentation in modern Europeans were not yet widespread. The pale complexion commonly associated with British identity today is a later development, arriving with subsequent population movements thousands of years after these first returners. The first people back in Britain after the ice looked nothing like the modern stereotype of a British person. The toolkit these returners bring is the most refined stone technology Britain has seen to this point. Magdalenian blades are thin, precisely struck, and shaped into a range of specialized forms. Backed blades, one edge blunted intentionally for safe handling, serve as cutting tools and as components hafted into composite weapons. Burns engraved bone and antler into tools and objects that go beyond the purely functional. Perforated batons made from reindeer antler, found at Gough's Cave, show extensive wear consistent with use in rope-making or hide-working, objects that are both tools and evidence of a sophisticated material culture. The animals these people are hunting have also changed in the centuries since Britain was last occupied. The woolly mammoth is present, but no longer dominant. Horse is now the primary prey at Gough's Cave, with red deer close behind. Reindeer, bison, and aurochs also appear in the bone assemblages. The megafauna world is still intact, but visibly thinning. The short-faced bear is gone from Britain by this point. The cave hyena, so dominant in earlier periods, has disappeared. The predator landscape is becoming slightly less dangerous, which does not mean it is safe. Cave lions are still present, wolves still hunt in packs, and the rivers run cold enough to kill a person who enters unprepared. The warming that brings people back to Britain also begins changing the landscape in ways that will eventually close it to the hunters who have just returned. As temperatures rise, trees begin establishing themselves across the open grassland. Birch first, then pine, spreading northward and upward into areas that were previously too cold to support woodland. The open mammoth steppe that has defined this landscape for tens of thousands of years is slowly being replaced. The change is gradual enough that no individual alive during this recolonization witnesses more than a fraction of it. But across generations, it will transform Britain into something entirely different, a forested island that demands a completely new way of living. For now, in the centuries immediately following the return, life is good by the standards of this world. The herds are recovering, the land is opening, the rivers are full of fish, the bands moving through the British landscape have resources on a scale they have not had access to for thousands of years, and they are making use of all of it, hunting, fishing, gathering plant foods as the vegetation recovers and diversifies. The richness of the Gough's Cave artifact assemblage reflects this abundance. These are not desperate people surviving at the margin. They are skilled people exploiting a productive landscape with confidence and sophistication. But the warming that has given them this abundance is not done changing things. The Building Alarud period, this warm window following the glacial maximum, is not the end of the cold. It is a pause. Somewhere around 12,900 years ago, the temperature will drop again with a speed that mirrors the warming that preceded it. The Younger Dryas, the final cold reversal before the permanent end of the Ice Age, is coming. The people living in Britain in the warmth of the Building Alarud have no way to know this. They are building lives in a landscape that is about to turn on them again. What they leave behind in the floor of Gough's Cave, the tools, the animal bones, the carefully shaped human skulls, is a record of people who came back to a land their ancestors had known, who found it transformed and rich, and who lived here intensely for a short time before the world shifted again. They are not a footnote. They are the second chapter of human life in Britain, brief and remarkable. And they tell us that the relationship between people and this particular piece of land has never been simple, never been stable, and never been anything less than completely human. The warm window that follows the last glacial maximum lasts roughly 1,800 years. In geological terms, that is brief. In human terms, it is 60 to 70 generations, long enough for people born into it to have no living memory of the ice, long enough for an entirely new relationship with the land to develop. This period, known to scientists as the Billing-Allerud Interstadial, is the closest thing to flourishing that Upper Paleolithic Britain will ever see. It will not last, but while it does, the land is alive in a way it has not been for thousands of years. The change is visible in the ground itself. As temperatures rise, the bare periglacial soil that covered southern Britain during the glacial maximum begins to hold vegetation. Pioneer plants move in first: mosses, sedges, low shrubs able to survive in thin, unstable soil. Then, juniper scrub spreads across the hillsides. Then birch, the great colonizer of post-glacial landscapes, begins establishing across the river valleys and sheltered slopes. The open mammoth steppe does not disappear overnight, but its edges are being eaten by woodland, and the people living in this changing landscape can see the difference accumulating year by year, valley by valley. For the hunters, the changing vegetation is not simply a visual backdrop. It changes everything about how they live. The open steppe favored horse and reindeer, herd animals that move across flat ground in large numbers, so interceptable at river crossings and valley mouths where hunters with atlatls could position themselves effectively. As woodland expands, those open interception points become rarer. The herds fragment. Hunting requires different strategies, more stalking through cover, more individual kills rather than coordinated drives. The people adapting to this shift are not failing. They are changing, as they always change. But the change costs effort and accumulated knowledge that has to be rebuilt. The animals themselves are responding to the warming in ways that ripple through the whole ecosystem. Woolly rhinoceros populations, already stressed by the glacial maximum, do not recover well in the warming. They disappear from Britain during this period. Cave lions become rarer as the open steppe that sustained their prey base contracts. Giant deer, the largest deer that ever lived, are still present but thinning. Woolly mammoth persist, but they are increasingly animals of specific refugia rather than the dominant presence they once were. The megafauna world, intact for tens of thousands of years, is visibly contracting, and the hunters who have always depended on it are watching it happen. What expands to fill the gap is water. The warming releases enormous quantities of meltwater from the retreating ice sheets, and that water has to go somewhere. Rivers run high and fast, cutting new channels, flooding low ground, reshaping valley floors that have been frozen and stable for millennia. Sea levels rise steadily. Doggerland, the great plain connecting Britain to continental Europe, begins to shrink at its lowest lying margins. So coastal lagoons form where dry grasslands stood a few centuries before. The edges of the British landscape are in motion in ways that accumulate silently across generations, but that add up over the course of this warm period to a fundamentally different geography. For the people living on Doggerland itself, this is not an abstract process. It is the gradual disappearance of land they know, of hunting grounds, of campsites, of river crossings that their grandparents used and that their grandchildren will find underwater. This slow inundation will continue long after the Upper Paleolithic ends, and it will eventually sever Britain from Europe entirely. But during the Billing-Allerud, the process is in its early stages. Doggerland is still vast, still productive, and is still the heart of the human landscape that connects Britain to the continent. People move freely across it, and the bands ranging through Britain are not isolated. They are part of a broader, connected world. The connections matter for more than logistics. Ideas travel with people. Tool innovations developed in one part of Western Europe spread across Doggerland and into Britain within generations. The Magdalenian cultural tradition that these people belong to is not a British invention. It is a pan-European phenomenon, and Britain participates in it precisely because the land connection allows participation. When a new technique for hafting a blade appears in what is now northern France, it reaches Britain not through some mysterious diffusion, but because people walk back and forth, because bands meet at seasonal aggregation points, yet because information travels in human memory across the landscape. At Creswell Crags, on the border of what is now Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, something remarkable is preserved from this period. The cave system there contains the only known cave art in Britain. Engravings on the cave walls depicting bison, deer, and birds, alongside abstract markings whose meaning we cannot fully recover. Discovered in 2003 after lying unnoticed for over a century of archaeological investigation, the Creswell engravings date to this warm period, roughly 13,000 years ago. They are not paintings in the style of Lascaux or Altamira. They are incised lines cut into the rock with a sharp stone point. But they are art. And they tell us that the people camping and hunting in this part of Britain during the Billing Alarud were participating in the same tradition of marking the world that produced the great painted caves of southwestern Europe. Why make art on a cave wall? The question has no single answer, and probably never did. The animals depicted at Creswell are the same animals these people hunt: bison, deer. Whether the images were made for practical purposes, ritual purposes, or simply as expression is something we cannot determine from the marks alone. What we can say is that the act of making them required time, required a decision to make them, required a conception of what the image would look like before it was made. This is planning, imagination, and intention translated into physical form. Whatever else these people were doing in that cave, they were not simply surviving. They were thinking about the world in ways that left a deliberate mark on it. The population of Britain during this warm window is larger than it has ever been. The productivity of the recovering ecosystem, more varied prey animals, more plant foods as vegetation diversifies, abundant fish in the rivers running full with meltwater, supports a density of people that the glacial maximum never could. Bands are ranging more widely, meeting more often, exchanging more. The genetic evidence from sites like Gough's Cave and Kendrick's Cave shows distinct ancestral populations arriving from different parts of Europe, which means this is an active, porous landscape, not a closed pocket of isolated survivors. Britain in the Billing Alarud is connected, populated, and culturally alive. The Robin Hood Cave at Creswell Crags yields another object from this period that stops you in your tracks if you look at it carefully. It is a fragment of horse rib, roughly the size of a hand, and engraved on its surface is a horse's head. Detailed, proportionally accurate, the eye indicated, the muzzle shaped correctly. It was found in 1876 and for a long time sat in museum collections without being fully appreciated for what it is. One of the oldest pieces of figurative portable art ever found in Britain, made by a person who observed horses closely enough to render one from memory onto bone with a stone tool. That level of observation, that translation of a living animal into a portable image, is not a simple act. It tells you something about the inner life of the person who made it. The seasonal round of life during this period is shaped by the recovering but still open landscape. Spring brings the return of migratory birds and the first plant growth after winter. Gathering begins as soon as the ground softens. Summer is for ranging widely, following herds, exploiting the full breadth of the territory. Autumn is for intensive hunting and food storage before the cold returns. Winter is for the cave systems and the sheltered valleys, for tool-making by firelight, for the teaching and storytelling that carries knowledge from one generation to the next. This rhythm has been the structure of human life in Britain since the first arrival, and it continues through the Billing Alarud with the particular richness that a productive landscape allows. Then, around 12,900 years ago, the temperature drops. No, not gradually. The transition into the Younger Dryas cold reversal happens within decades, possibly faster. The ice cores record it as an abrupt step down, not a slow decline. Summer temperatures in Britain fall sharply. The birch woodland that has been spreading northward and upward across the landscape begins to die back. The rivers, fed less by meltwater, run lower and colder. The recovering herds feel the change in the vegetation first, and the hunters feel it through the herds. The brief flourishing of the Böling Alarud is over, and what comes next will test the people of Britain in ways that even the last glacial maximum did not fully prepare them for. Because this time, some of them will try to stay. Around 12,900 years ago, the warming stops. Not gradually. The transition happens within decades, possibly faster. Your Greenland ice cores record a temperature drop of up to 10 degrees Celsius in a geological instant. Across Europe, average annual temperatures fall by 2 to 6 degrees. That sounds modest until you understand what it means on the ground. The birch woodland retreating back down the hillsides, the river levels dropping, the growing season shortening until the plants that sustain the herds are struggling to recover each summer. For the people living in Britain, the world they have built their lives around is contracting again. The most likely cause of this reversal sits in the North Atlantic Ocean. As the great ice sheets of North America melted, enormous quantities of fresh water poured into the Atlantic. Cold, low-salinity water that disrupted the ocean circulation system, carrying warm water northward from the tropics. When that circulation weakened, the heat it delivered to northwestern Europe was cut off. Britain, sitting at the edge of the Atlantic, felt the consequences more sharply than almost anywhere else. The ocean that had been moderating the climate became, in effect, a cold engine. The woodland that had spread so promisingly across Britain during the Böling Alarud retreats. Pollen records from lake sediments across Britain show the change written in the sediment layers. Above the Böling Alarud deposits, the birch and pine pollen disappears and is replaced by the pollen of open tundra plants. Dryas octopetala, the small white Arctic wildflower that gives this period its name, spreads back across ground that had been forest only a few generations before. The landscape is not returning all the way to full glacial conditions. Yeah, but it is moving in that direction with a speed that leaves no time for gradual adjustment. In Scotland, glaciers reform. The Loch Lomond Stadial, the British name for the Younger Dryas, sees ice caps re-establishing across the Scottish Highlands, pushing south down the major valleys. The ice does not reach England this time, but its presence in the north reshapes the whole country's climate. Cold winds descend from the ice surface, lowering temperatures across the Midlands and south. Permafrost returns to higher ground. The productive river valleys of southern Britain, which had been recovering well, become harder, colder, and less reliable. The human population of Britain at the onset of the Younger Dryas is small, perhaps a few hundred people scattered across the southern parts of the country. What happens to them in the first centuries of the cold reversal is difficult to read precisely from the archaeological record, because Britain's Younger Dryas sites are sparse. The evidence from comparable sites across the southern North Sea basin suggests a significant population reduction in the early Younger Dryas, followed by partial recovery as conditions stabilize slightly in the middle of the period. Whether Britain is abandoned entirely, or whether a remnant population clings on in the most sheltered southern areas, remains genuinely uncertain. The animal populations feel the change immediately. Horse and red deer, the primary prey of these hunters, contract their ranges southward as the vegetation retreats. Reindeer, more suited to open tundra conditions, may have actually increased in parts of Britain as the landscape opened up again. Their bones appear at some late Paleolithic British sites in numbers that suggest they were a reliable prey animal during this cold period. The hunting strategies that had evolved during the warmer window, stalking through woodland, exploiting river systems rich with fish, must be adjusted again for a more open, colder, more unpredictable landscape. The woolly mammoth, already thinning before the Younger Dryas, faces severe additional pressure during this period. Their numbers in Britain, never fully recovered from the glacial maximum, decline further. The cold itself is not the problem. Mammoths are Ice Age animals, and cold suits them. The problem is the instability, the repeated swings between conditions, the repeated contraction and recovery of the steppe grassland that sustains them. A species that reproduces slowly, a mammoth cow produces one calf every 4 to 5 years, cannot absorb repeated population crashes and recover fast enough to rebuild before the next stress hits. The people who remain in or return to Britain during the Younger Dryas belong to what archaeologists call the Arensbergian culture, a tradition identified primarily through a distinctive Tange point, a carefully worked flint projectile designed to be hafted onto a shaft. These points are found at sites across the southern North Sea basin, including in material dredged from what is now the seabed of Doggerland. The Arensbergian people are specialist reindeer hunters, adapted specifically to the open tundra conditions that the Younger Dryas has reimposed. They are not the same cultural tradition as the Magdalenians who preceded them, though they are almost certainly descended from related populations. Doggerland remains above water through the Younger Dryas. The sea level rise that had begun during the Billing Alarud slows and partially reverses as the cold locks water back into ice. The Great Plain between Britain and continental Europe is still passable, still inhabited, and the human groups moving through it during the Younger Dryas are connected to a broader population spread across what is now the southern North Sea basin. Britain's western edge during this period is not the edge of the habitable world. It is the far margin of a landscape whose center of gravity sits further east, on the still productive lowlands of Doggerland. Endurance is the defining quality of the Younger Dryas in human terms. This is not a period of innovation or cultural fluorescence. The evidence from across northwestern Europe shows a simpler, more focused toolkit, a narrower subsistence base centered on reindeer hunting, and a population that is surviving rather than thriving. These are people who have adapted to the minimum, stripped their lives back to what works in hard conditions, and are holding on. There is nothing romanticized about this. It is simply what humans do when the margin narrows. They tighten, they focus, they endure. Then, around 11,700 years ago, the cold ends. Again, without warning. Again, within decades. The Greenland ice cores show the transition as an abrupt step up, temperatures rising 5 to 10 degrees Celsius within 50 years, possibly faster. The AMOC circulation that had been disrupted restores itself. Warm Atlantic water begins reaching the shores of northwestern Europe again. The permafrost melts. The rivers run higher. The birch begins spreading back up the hillsides within a generation or two of the warming. This time, unlike the Billing Alarud, the warmth does not reverse. The Holocene has begun, and the Ice Age, after more than 100,000 years, is permanently over. For the people at the edge of Britain watching spring arrive with an intensity it has not had in over 1,000 years, there is no way to know that this warming is the last one, that the cold will not return as it has returned before. They have no framework for permanent climate change. Their entire cultural memory is built on a world that swings between cold and less cold, now that abandons and returns, that gives and takes away. What they know is that the animals are moving north again, that the vegetation is recovering, that the rivers are filling. They follow, as they always follow. They move into a warming world that is, for the first time in the entire human story of Britain, about to stay warm. Around 11,700 years ago, the cold ends for the last time. The Greenland ice cores record it as an unmistakable step, temperatures rising sharply within decades, the kind of change that in any previous period would have been followed eventually by another reversal. This time, there is no reversal. The Holocene epoch begins, and with it, the permanent end of the world that has defined human life in Britain for the entirety of its existence. The Ice Age is over. The world that comes next is different in almost every way that matters. The ice sheets collapse faster than they formed. Rivers run swollen with meltwater, cutting new channels, flooding valley floors, reshaping lowland terrain within human lifetimes. In Scotland, the ice that reformed during the Younger Dryas melts back rapidly, uncovering bare rock and thin soil that will take centuries to become productive ground. Sea levels, which had stabilized or even slightly recovered during the Younger Dryas cold, begin rising again, steadily, relentlessly, at rates that add meters of water to the world's coastlines across each century. The vegetation changes are visible within a generation. Where tundra plants and sparse grassland covered the ground during the Younger Dryas, but pioneer species move in almost immediately after the warming. Willow first along watercourses, then birch spreading fast across open ground, then hazel pushing into the birch stands. These are not gradual background processes. They are observable changes happening within the lifetime of people who were born into a colder, opener world. A person who hunted horse across open grassland in childhood might find those same valleys covered in birch woodland by the time they are old. For the hunters, this transformation is the most significant thing that has happened to their world in living memory. The open landscape that suited the hunting strategies of the Upper Paleolithic, the long sight lines, the interception points at river crossings, the ability to see herds moving from a distance, is being replaced by something that requires entirely different skills. Stalking through woodland cover, reading signs rather than relying on direct observation, adjusting to prey animals that are themselves adjusting to the new conditions. The toolkit must change. The seasonal patterns must change. Everything that was learned and passed down must be interrogated against a landscape that no longer matches the knowledge. The megafauna go first, or most of them do. Woolly rhinoceros disappear from Britain entirely in the early Holocene, their open grassland habitat gone, unable to adapt to the closing woodland. The giant deer, already thinning through the Younger Dryas, makes its last appearance in Britain shortly after the warming begins. Cave lions, whose prey base is reshaping and whose open country hunting strategies are poorly matched to a forested landscape, vanish from the British record. Cave hyenas, whose populations have been declining for thousands of years, are gone. The woolly mammoth holds on longer than most people expect. Small populations persist in refugia across Eurasia for thousands of years after the main extinction. But in Britain, the evidence puts their disappearance in the early Holocene, within a few centuries of the warming. What kills them is still debated. Climate change restructures the ecosystem they depend on. The mammoth steppe, that vast productive grassland, cannot exist in a warming, foresting world. But climate alone has driven previous transitions, and the megafauna survived those. What is different this time is the presence of human hunters on every continent simultaneously. A species that reproduces slowly, a mammoth cow raises one calf every 4 to 5 years, cannot sustain consistent additional mortality from hunting on top of habitat loss. The two pressures together achieve what neither alone might have managed. The people hunting mammoths in Britain at the end of the Ice Age are not driving a deliberate extermination. They are simply hunting, as they always have, while the world changes in ways that remove the margin that allowed those species to recover. The human populations in Britain adapt, as human populations always adapt. The Arnsbergian reindeer hunters of the Younger Dryas give way to new cultural traditions suited to the new world. Reindeer themselves follow the retreating cold northward out of Britain, and the people who specialized in hunting them either follow or shift their subsistence strategies. What replaces the old patterns is something richer and more varied, a broader exploitation of a landscape that, for all its disruption, is actually more productive in terms of total available food than the cold tundra it replaces. Red deer thrive in the new woodland, wild boar appear. Aurochs, enormous wild cattle, standing nearly 6 feet at the shoulder, move into Britain from the continent across Doggerland before the land connection finally closes. Fish populations in the warming rivers diversify and grow. Doggerland itself is dying. The sea level rise that has been accumulating since the first warming at 14,700 BCE is now accelerating. San and the Great Plain that has connected Britain to Europe since before the first human arrival is shrinking year by year. The lowest areas flood first, coastal marshes becoming tidal, river mouths widening into estuaries, the shallow eastern margins of the plain disappearing under water that advances season by season. The people living on Doggerland do not all evacuate at once. They contract toward higher ground as the lower ground becomes unreachable, generation by generation. The final severance of Britain from continental Europe, when the last land connection floods and Britain becomes an island for the first time in its history, probably occurs somewhere around 6,500 BCE. By then, the people who called Doggerland home have already moved by necessity onto higher ground. The cultural world is changing too. If the Paleolithic world, defined by the open landscape, the great herds, the long-range mobility of small bands following animals across vast territories, is becoming the Mesolithic world. The transition is not a sharp line, but a gradual shift in emphasis. More intensive exploitation of a smaller territory, greater reliance on plant foods and fish, more complex use of the woodland environment, new tools suited to new prey. The people living through this transition do not experience it as a historical period ending and another beginning. They experience it as the world they know, slowly becoming a world they need to learn again. The last people of Upper Paleolithic Britain carry within them the accumulated knowledge of 30,000 years of human life in this landscape, the longest continuous cultural tradition in British prehistory. They know how to hunt mammoth, though mammoths are now functionally gone from their world. They know how to read open ground for miles, though the open ground is closing around them. They know the stories that encode the old knowledge, the old landscape, the old animals. Some of that knowledge will become obsolete within a generation. Some of it will survive, transformed and adapted into the cultures that follow. The Mesolithic people who inherit Britain are in many ways the direct descendants, culturally and in some cases genetically, of the Paleolithic people whose world the warming has ended. What the end of the Ice Age leaves behind in Britain is not a story of collapse. It is a story of transformation. The people who navigated the last glacial maximum, who returned after the Younger Dryas, who survived every swing the climate threw at them across 30,000 years, were not undone by the warming. They adapted to it, as they adapted to everything. The world they built in the new conditions, the Mesolithic world of forest and river and coast, is not a diminished version of what came before. It is a different achievement, built on different knowledge, shaped by a different landscape. Britain after the Ice Age is still inhabited by people whose capacity for endurance and adaptation has been tested harder than almost anything the modern world can imagine. They passed that test, as they always passed it. Let's step back from the narrative for a moment. Across the previous sections, you have followed these people through arrivals and abandonments, through ice and warming, through mammoth hunts and ritual burials. But there is a question running underneath all of it that deserves a direct answer. Who were they really? Not where they lived or what they hunted, but what kind of minds they had, what kind of inner lives, what they made when survival alone did not demand it. The answer is more than most people expect. Start with the tools, because tools are the most abundant evidence we have. Making a late Upper Paleolithic blade, the kind of thin, precisely struck flint point found at Guff's Cave and Creswell Crags, is not something you can work out by trial and error in an afternoon. Modern experimental archaeologists who attempt it without training produce thick, clumsy results after weeks of practice. These people produced them consistently from adolescence onward. And because they had been trained since childhood by people who had been trained since childhood going back hundreds of generations, the knowledge embedded in a single stone tool represents an unbroken chain of teaching stretching back further than we can easily imagine. They understood materials in ways that go well beyond simple observation. Certain flints respond differently to heat treatment. Burying a nodule in hot ash overnight changes its internal structure and makes it easier to flake with precision. This is not an accidental discovery. It requires noticing the difference, repeating the process deliberately, and passing the technique on. Heat treatment of stone appears in the European record during the Upper Paleolithic. These people were conducting what amounts to materials science experiments and incorporating the results into their toolkit. Clothing is another place where the sophistication becomes undeniable. Bone needles with eyes, designed for pulling sinew thread through pre-punched holes in hide, are not a late development. They appear in the Aurignacian archaeological record among the earliest modern human material in Europe. A needle with an eye is not a pointed stick. It is a precision instrument that requires controlled drilling through bone to create the hole, and it implies tailored clothing, shaped, fitted garments sewn to specification. The conceptual distance between wrapping yourself in a skin and designing a garment is significant, and these people had already crossed it 40,000 years ago. Now go deeper than tools. And somewhere around 35,000 years ago, in a cave in what is now southern Germany, a person sat down with a vulture wing bone and spent considerable time, hours probably, carving 5 finger holes into it at precise intervals. The result was a flute. When modern researchers have reconstructed these instruments and played them, they produce a full diatonic scale. The Hohlfels flute is the oldest confirmed musical instrument yet found anywhere in the world. Music in this period is not a performance art. It is something people do around fires, something woven into the social fabric, something that crosses the gap between the functional world and the world of feeling and meaning. These people had both. The cave art of Western Europe is the most famous evidence of the Upper Paleolithic inner life. And it rewards attention beyond the surface impression of pretty animals on walls. The paintings at Lascaux, Chauvet, and Altamira were not made near cave entrances where people lived. They were made deep in the interior, in chambers that required navigating hundreds of meters of dark passage to reach, passage that could only be done with a lamp-burning animal fat, which produces enough light to paint by, but not enough to fully illuminate the space around you. Making art in that context is not casual. It is deliberate, it is effortful, and it is directed inward, towards something in the dark that the outside world was not meant to see. What the paintings show is worth examining carefully. The most common subjects are horses, bison, deer, aurochs, and mammoth, the primary prey animals of the people making them. But they are not simple hunting records. The animals are depicted with an accuracy and a life that required sustained, close observation. The way a horse holds its head when alert, the angle of a bison's shoulder, the specific posture of a deer mid-leap. These painters knew these animals with an intimacy that comes from spending entire lives in close proximity to them, watching them, reading them, depending on them. The art is the record of that intimacy as much as anything else. At Creswell Crags in Derbyshire, the only confirmed cave art site in Britain, around 80 engravings were identified in 2003 after more than a century of archaeological work at the site had missed them entirely. Deer, bison, horse, and what may be bird-headed human figures are cut into the cave walls in multiple layers, and some engravings placed directly over older ones. The suggestion that some were designed to be viewed by firelight is compelling. The dancing shadows would have given the incised lines a movement and life that flat overhead illumination flattens completely. The people at Creswell were thinking about how their art would be experienced, not just making marks. Personal ornaments appear in the British record from the earliest Aurignacian occupation onward: pierced shells, perforated animal teeth, carved ivory beads. These objects serve no survival purpose. They are the material expression of identity, of group membership, of individual distinction within a social world. Wearing a specific combination of ornaments communicates something to the people around you, something about who you are, which group you belong to, what your status is. So personal ornament is social signaling, and social signaling implies a sufficiently complex social world to make the signaling meaningful. These people had that world. The burials tell us the most. The Paviland burial, the young man covered in red ochre, laid with mammoth ivory rods and periwinkle shell ornaments, a mammoth skull placed at his head, is the most complete British example, but it is not unique in kind. Across Europe, Upper Paleolithic burials consistently show the same features: deliberate positioning of the body, use of ochre pigment, inclusion of grave goods. The ochre requires collection, transport, and processing before it can be applied. The grave goods require selection and placement. None of this happens automatically. All of it reflects a set of beliefs about what a person is and what their death means. What those beliefs were exactly, we cannot say. That they existed, the bones confirm beyond any reasonable doubt. There is a category of object from this period that tends to get overlooked: the perforated baton, sometimes called a bâton de commandement. These are rods of antler or bone, perforated at one end with a smooth hole, found across Upper Paleolithic Europe, including at Creswell Cave. Their function is debated. Rope straightening tools, spear shaft straighteners, and ceremonial staffs have all been proposed, but the level of workmanship invested in them goes well beyond any purely functional explanation. Many are engraved with animals or abstract patterns. They were carried, they were kept, and they were meaningful objects in the lives of the people who made them. Consider what all of this adds up to. In the same 30,000-year period, the people of Upper Paleolithic Britain and their continental contemporaries were making tailored clothing, constructing musical instruments, painting detailed figurative art in the deep interior of caves, burying their dead with ceremony and ochre, wearing personal ornaments that communicated social identity, carving portable art objects from bone and ivory, and developing a stone toolkit that modern craftspeople struggle to replicate. The word primitive does not survive contact with this evidence. These are people with a fully developed inner life, a symbolic world, a social complexity, and a creative capacity that differs from modern people not in kind, but only in the specific forms it takes. The knowledge system that sustained all of this was oral and embodied, carried in memory, transmitted through demonstration and story, stored in no external medium whatsoever. Every piece of knowledge these people had was held by a living person, and when that person died, it either lived on in someone else or it was gone. This is not a limitation. It is a different relationship with knowledge than the one modern people have. More immediate, more personal, more vulnerable to individual loss, but also more integrated into the fabric of daily life than anything stored in a book or a database. The old woman in a band of 25 people who knows which plants are poisonous and which heal is not a library. She is the library, and she knows it. There is one more thing worth saying before leaving this section, and it concerns the relationship between these people and the animals they shared their world with. The cave art does not depict hunting scenes with anything like the frequency you might expect. It depicts animals, horses running, bison standing, mammoths in profile, without human figures in most cases, without spears or wounds or signs of the kill. Whatever the art means in its full context, it is not a simple trophy record. It suggests something closer to what people who spend their entire lives alongside wild animals tend to develop. A relationship that is simultaneously practical and something more than practical. A recognition of the animals as beings whose existence matters beyond their utility. These people lived inside an ecosystem rather than apart from it. And the art they made in the dark, deep in the rock, reflects that orientation in ways we are still working to understand. None of what has been described in this section was inevitable. These people did not produce art and music and ceremony because the species automatically does these things given enough time. They did it because they were specific people in a specific place and time who had developed specific cultural traditions across generations of living together, teaching each other, and finding meaning in a world that was beautiful and dangerous and fully alive around them. That is the truest thing that can be said about the people of Upper Paleolithic Britain. They were here, they were real, and they made things that still speak, however quietly, across 40,000 years of silence. The term prehistoric means before written history, and it is accurate as far as it goes. But it carries a connotation of darkness, less of a world before human thought fully arrived, that the evidence will not support. The Upper Paleolithic is not before human thought. It is before writing. The thought was already there, fully formed, expressing itself in every medium available: stone, bone, pigment, music, story, ceremony. What was missing was not the mind. What was missing was a technology for externalizing it. When writing eventually arrives, thousands of years after the last ice age Britain walks this land, it does not create human consciousness. It simply gives it a new address. What these people made and how they lived is not a prelude to the real story of humanity. It is part of the real story, as legitimate and as worthy of attention as anything that comes after. The 30,000 years of human life in Upper Paleolithic Britain are not a rough draft. They are a chapter, fully written by people who were fully human, who felt the cold, who mourned their dead, who painted horses in the dark for reasons we may never completely understand, and who passed everything they knew to the next generation because that is what humans do, and have always done, and will always do. They were us, not like us, us. And the world they built in the cold and the dark, with stone and bone and fire and story, deserves to be remembered as exactly what it was. Ancient DNA has transformed what we know about prehistoric people in the last decade, and the picture it paints of Upper Paleolithic Britain is one that consistently surprises modern audiences. For most of the 20th century, as the assumption was simple, the people who lived in Britain before farming arrived were essentially the distant ancestors of modern British people, and they probably looked more or less like modern British people. The DNA evidence dismantled that assumption completely. The Upper Paleolithic people of Britain, along with their contemporaries across Western Europe, lacked the genetic variants associated with light skin pigmentation that are common in modern Europeans. Studies analyzing dozens of ancient genomes from this period consistently find an absence of the key skin-lightening alleles that spread across Europe much later. The evidence points clearly toward dark or dark to intermediate skin as the norm across the entire Upper Paleolithic population of Britain and Western Europe. The eyes tell a different story, and the same individuals who carried genes for dark skin frequently carried variants associated with blue or green eyes, a combination that strikes modern observers as paradoxical, but was, according to the genetic evidence, entirely typical of these populations. The combination of dark skin and light eyes was not an anomaly. It was the standard phenotype of Western European hunter-gatherers for tens of thousands of years. The pale-skinned, pale-eyed image of ancient Northern Europeans is a later development, arriving with subsequent population movements. The reason dark skin persisted for so long at northern latitudes relates to diet rather than sunlight. The standard explanation for light skin in northern populations is that reduced UV radiation at high latitudes makes lighter skin advantageous for vitamin D synthesis. But these hunter-gatherers were getting their vitamin D from food, oily fish, organ meats, and animal fat in quantities that modern diets rarely match. The dietary source made skin-lightening selection pressure much weaker. It was only later, when farming populations with grain-heavy diets arrived and reduced dietary vitamin D intake, that lighter skin became strongly selected for. The genetic picture of Upper Paleolithic Britain is not a single continuous population. The ancient DNA from Gough's Cave and Kendrick's Cave, published in a 2022 Nature Ecology and Evolution study, reveals two genetically distinct groups arriving in Britain within roughly 1,000 years of each other after the last glacial maximum. The Gough's Cave individual traces ancestry predominantly to Magdalenian-associated populations from southwestern Europe. The Kendrick's Cave individual traces a different ancestry, the Villabruna cluster, a lineage that expands across northwestern Europe around 14,000 years ago, and that becomes dominant across the continent in the millennia that follow. This Villabruna ancestry, also called Western Hunter-Gatherer, or WHG ancestry, becomes the predominant lineage in Britain from around 14,000 years ago onward through the rest of the Upper Paleolithic and into the Mesolithic. It is broadly continuous across Western Europe from the Atlantic coast to the Balkans, representing the population that inhabits Britain when the farming revolution eventually reaches these islands around 4000 BCE. When Cheddarman, the famous Mesolithic individual from Gough's Cave dated to around 7000 BCE, is sequenced, he sits squarely within this Western hunter-gatherer cluster, dark-skinned and blue-eyed, the direct genetic heir of the Villabruna expansion. What happens to these people after farming arrives is a story for the next video, but the short version, relevant here because it explains why almost no modern British person carries significant Upper Paleolithic British ancestry, is this. The farming revolution that reaches Britain around 4000 BCE is associated with a near-complete population replacement. The incoming Neolithic farmers, carrying ancestry ultimately derived from Anatolia, largely displaced the hunter-gatherer populations. Then, around 2400 BCE, a second major replacement occurs with the arrival of the Bell Beaker people from the Pontic Steppe, who replaced roughly 90% of the Neolithic British gene pool within a few centuries. And the people who stood in the cold grassland of Ice Age Britain, who painted horses at Creswell and buried their dead in red ochre at Paviland, contribute on average around 10% to the ancestry of modern British people. And much of that comes through continental Western hunter-gatherer populations rather than directly from British Paleolithic lineages. This does not diminish who they were. Their genetic contribution to modern Britain may be small, but their cultural contribution, the accumulated knowledge, the traditions of toolmaking and hunting and art that shaped everything that came after, is harder to quantify and harder to erase. They were here first. They survived the ice. They came back. And the land they lived in still carries the faint traces of their presence in the bones in the cave floors, or in the cut marks on ancient stone and in the engravings on the walls of a limestone gorge in Derbyshire that no one noticed for more than a century. The sites that survive from 30,000 years of human life in Britain fit on a short list. Kent's Cavern in Devon, the oldest confirmed modern human fossil in northwestern Europe, a fragment of jaw that sat in museum collections for decades before anyone understood what it meant. Paviland on the Gower Peninsula, the oldest ceremonial burial in Western Europe, a young man covered in red ochre in a cave that is now accessible only at low tide on a cliff face above the Bristol Channel. Gough's Cave in Cheddar, a hunting camp used intensively for perhaps 2 or 3 generations, yielding the richest collection of Upper Paleolithic artifacts in Britain and the unsettling evidence of ritual cannibalism. Creswell Crags on the Derbyshire-Nottinghamshire border, the northernmost cave art in Europe, discovered in 2003 after more than a century of excavation at the same site, had missed it entirely. These 4 sites are not the whole story. They are the fragments the ground chose to keep. Everything else is gone. The open-air camps where bands spent most of their time, the skin tents and bone frame shelters, the fire pits, and the middens of cracked bone and discarded tools. All of it dissolved back into the ground across thousands of years of weathering, flooding, and the slow work of geology. The caves survived because limestone preserves. Everything built on open ground did not. What we know about these people is built almost entirely on what they happened to leave in caves, and caves were only ever the edges of their lives. This means we are almost certainly underestimating them. The caves that survive are concentrated in a few limestone regions of southern Britain: the Mendips, the Gower Peninsula, the Derbyshire limestone. These are the places where the right geology happened to exist. People almost certainly ranged across a much wider territory, including areas where no caves were available and no preservation was possible. The picture we have of Upper Paleolithic Britain is a window, not a map. The amber found at Gough's Cave tells part of the story that geography alone cannot. Infrared spectroscopy identified the amber as Baltic in origin, sourced from the shores of what is now the Baltic Sea, hundreds of miles from Somerset. Someone carried it or traded it through several hands across a chain of exchanges from the Baltic coast to a cave in the Mendip Hills. This is not the behavior of isolated bands scratching for survival. This is a connected world, a network of people and materials moving across a landscape that we tend to imagine as empty, but was not. The saber-toothed cat teeth found at Kent's Cavern and Robin Hood Cave at Creswell Crags present a similar puzzle. Homotherium, the scimitar-toothed cat, has left no skeletal remains anywhere in Britain, only isolated teeth. The most compelling explanation is that the teeth arrived as trade goods carried across from continental Europe, valued for reasons we cannot fully reconstruct. Prehistoric people trading exotic animal parts across hundreds of miles reinforces a picture of social networks, of exchange relationships, of a human world far more interconnected than the sparse archaeological record suggests. The art at Creswell is worth sitting with for a moment. It was the northernmost cave art in Europe when it was discovered, and it had been overlooked for over 150 years of archaeological investigation at the same site. The reason it was missed is that it was made with shallow incised lines rather than bold painted strokes, and it is best seen in raking light, the kind of flickering illumination that a fire or a fat lamp produces, not the flat overhead lighting of modern archaeological survey. The people who made it understood how it would be seen. They made it for firelight, not for torches. 30,000 years is a span of time that resists easy comprehension. Anatomically, modern humans arrived in Britain roughly 42,000 years ago. The period of time between those first arrivals and the building of Stonehenge, itself ancient by any measure, is longer than the period between Stonehenge and today. Everything that human beings have recorded, built, written, composed, and invented in the last 5,000 years of documented history occupies a fraction of the time that people lived in Upper Paleolithic Britain. The silence is not emptiness. It is the absence of a recording medium, nothing more. The question of what these people mean to modern Britain is genuinely complicated. Genetically, as the previous section made clear, their direct contribution to the modern British population is small, around 10% on average, and much of that filtered through continental populations rather than direct British lineages. The population replacements of the Neolithic and Bronze Age were so thorough that the genetic thread connecting a modern British person to the people at Gough's Cave is thin. But genetics is not the only way to measure a legacy. The land itself carries their presence. Kent's Cavern is open to visitors in Torquay, sitting improbably among the hotels and fish and chip shops of the English Riviera, offering anyone willing to pay the entrance fee a walk through the same cave passages where Britain's oldest known modern human once lived. Paviland is accessible on foot at low tide, the red-stained earth of the burial site, long since eroded away by the Bristol Channel. But the cave itself still there, still the same cave, the same cliff, the same view out over water that 40,000 years ago was dry grassland. Creswell Crags runs tours specifically to see the engravings by torchlight, in something approaching the conditions under which they were made. Gough's Cave is part of the Cheddar Gorge tourist complex, which means that each year a substantial number of people walk through a cave where the oldest ceremonial burial in Western Europe once lay undisturbed on the floor. Most of them are probably thinking about the cheese. The researchers who work on this material often speak about a particular quality of connection that the physical evidence produces. Holding a Clovis point, or a Magdalenian blade, its edge is still sharp after 15,000 years in the ground. And knowing that the last hands to touch it before yours belong to someone who hunted mammoth and slept under stars brighter than any living person has seen, produces something that no amount of reading about prehistory quite replicates. The object closes the distance. It makes the person real in a way that dates and percentages do not. What they achieved deserves to be stated plainly. These people survived 3 major climatic episodes that tested the limits of human endurance: the initial cold of the early Upper Paleolithic, the catastrophic advance of the last glacial maximum, and the cold reversal of the Younger Dryas. Each time conditions permitted, they returned. Each time the land opened, they walked back into it. They hunted animals that had no modern equivalents in scale or danger. They made art in the dark. They buried their dead with ceremony. They maintained knowledge systems of extraordinary complexity without any external storage medium. And they did all of this across a span of time so vast that the entirety of recorded human history is dwarfed by comparison. The story of Upper Paleolithic Britain is, among other things, a story about what human beings are capable of under conditions of extreme difficulty. These people were not thriving despite the world they lived in. They were thriving because of who they were: intelligent, adaptable, deeply skilled, socially bonded in ways that made collective survival possible even when individual survival would have been impossible. The cold did not break them. The ice did not erase them. They bent. They retreated. They came back. That capacity to endure, to adapt, to return is the oldest continuously documented human characteristic in the British record. The last Upper Paleolithic Britons living through the Younger Dryas and then the warming that ended the Ice Age permanently did not know they were living through the end of an era. They were just living, making tools, following herds, teaching their children the things they would need to know, telling stories by fires and caves that still exist in a country that still carries their name for this period, even though they left no name for themselves. The Mesolithic world that follows them is a different chapter, written by people who were, in many ways, their direct heirs, inheriting a transformed landscape and making of it something new. But the chapter that ends with the last ice age is not a prologue. It is 30,000 years of fully human life, fully lived in the place we now call Britain. You can go and stand in these places: Kent's Cavern in Devon, Gough's Cave in Cheddar, Creswell Crags on the Derbyshire border, Paviland at low tide on the Gower coast. The rock is the same rock. The cave entrance frames the same sky. Whatever you feel standing there, and most people feel something, it is not sentiment or projection. It is the appropriate response to genuine antiquity, to the evidence that human beings were fully present in this landscape for longer than we usually remember, doing what humans do, surviving, making meaning, and leaving traces for people they could not have imagined to find.